Ann Judson, A Missionary Life for Burma, by Sharon James, Chapter 4, The Trying Scene of Parting, in 1812. Sea travelers at the beginning of the 19th century were dependent on the wind for power. Paddle steamers were used on rivers such as the Mississippi, but the huge coal consumption of such vessels meant that they would not be used for ocean routes until the 1830s. The journey by sea from America to England could take just over a month. The journey to India could take about 4 months. Without refrigeration, live animals and poultry were kept on board for meat. The problem of carrying sufficient fresh food and water for the long journey was immense. Conditions on board were unpleasant, and the ocean itself was hazardous. Back in 1806, Anne's only brother had been lost at sea. Moreover, sea travel at this time involved dangers from enemy ships. The war between France and Britain from 1793 to 1815 involved naval battles over disputes over seas territories. Between 1812 and 1814, Britain was also at war with America. In this unpromising context, the whole of 1811 was spent in attempts to organize the fledgling mission. First, Adoniram left for England on January 11th. He was to explore the possibility of the London Missionary Society's helping the American Congregationalists with the new mission venture. The ship on which Adoniram traveled was captured by the French. He and all the passengers were taken prisoner aboard La Invincible Napoleon, and he consequently experienced an unpleasant period of detention in France. Eventually, however, he gained his freedom and arrived in England on May of 1811. There he offered himself and 3 colleagues, Newell, Knott, and Hall, plus their 3 wives, to work with the London Missionary Society if funds were not forthcoming from America. Sailing from Gravesend on June 18th, he arrived back in New York on August 7th. In September, the Congregational Board met again. They vacillated. Some believed the whole venture should be postponed because of the imminent war between America and England. Adoniram decided to force the issue. He and Knott declared that if the board did not send them straight away, then they would go, supported by the London Missionary Society. This was sufficient. The board appointed Judson, Knott, Newell, and Hall as missionaries to Asia. A 5th man, Luther Rice, would soon be added to this number. Some regarded Adoniram's determination as commendable. Others saw his action as virtual blackmail. Preparations had to be made swiftly. As war with England became more and more likely, America was placed under blockade. Once a ship was found going to India, it would have to be taken, as it might be the last for a long time. Late in January of 1812, news came that a ship was to sail for Calcutta in a fortnight. Ordination services were fixed for February 6th, and whirlwind preparations were made, including a frantic collection of funds. On February 5th of 1812, Anne and Adoniram were married in the room of the Hassattines' house in which they had met. During the final days, Anne's young friend Harriet, aged only 18, married Samuel Newell. Also, on February 5th, there was an emotional farewell service for the 2 girls in Haverhill Church. Parson Allen had known Anne and Harriet since they were toddlers. He gave a solemn charge and composed a hymn for the occasion. There were few dry eyes, for all knew that this was a final farewell. In all probability, these girls would never see their families and friends again, and none knew what lay ahead of them. There was a larger and even more emotional charge service the next day. Anne had by now said her goodbyes to her family, her parents, her 3 sisters, Rebecca, Mary, and Abigail. The ordination of the missionaries was to take place in Salem. The tabernacle there was packed, with maybe as many as 2,000 squeezed in. From the beginning of the service, the gathering was hushed, as still as death. But when the ordination took place, an irresistible sighing and weeping broke out, and from this moment the entire rapt congregation seemed moved as the trees of the wood are moved by a mighty wind. Pent-up emotion could no longer be restrained. The historic significance of this service cannot be overestimated. America was sending abroad the first of what was to become, to date, the mightiest missionary force in Christian history. The ordination service having taken place on February 6th, it was found that places on 2 vessels were available. Due to the hazards of the ocean, it would be prudent for the missionaries to travel in two groups. On February 18th, Samuel and Roxanne Knott, Gordon Hall, and Luther Rice sailed in the Harmony from Philadelphia. The Harmony arrived in Calcutta on August 8th, a trip of nearly 6 months. Anne and Adoniram Judson and Samuel and Harriet Newell moved on board the caravan on February 18th, but had to wait for favorable winds before they set sail from Salem the next day. The caravan, a two-mast ship with square-rigged sails, made better time than the Harmony. It took 4 months to cross the Atlantic, round the Cape of Good Hope, and sail up to Calcutta. Finally arriving on June 18th of 1812, Anne recorded the departure as follows. February 18th. Took leave of my friends in native land, embarked on board the big caravan for India. Had so long anticipated the trying scene of parting that I found it more tolerable than I feared. Still my heart bleeds. O America, my native land, must I leave thee? Must I leave my parents and my sisters and brothers, my friends, beloved, and all the scenes of my early youth? Yes, I must leave you all, for a heathen land, an uncongenial clime. Farewell, happy, happy scenes, to never, no, never to be forgotten. February 19th, seasick all day and unable to do anything. My thoughts, more than usual, fixed on divine things, longed for the enjoyment of God's presence on our passage, that we may be preparing for usefulness in future life. In the night, had many distressing apprehensions of death. Felt unwilling to die on the sea, not so much on account of my state after death, as the dreadfulness of perishing amid the waves. February 21st, somewhat relieved from sickness, and able to read a few chapters in the Bible. Never had a greater sense of our obligations to live devoted to God, resulting from his distinguished mercies. Even on the ocean, confined as I am, I find many sources of enjoyment, and feel as happy as when on land in the midst of my friends. February 22nd. Oh, for a heart to live near to God, and serve him faithfully. I need nothing so much as ardent pity. I should feel happy in the consideration of having left my native land, my father's house, if by making this sacrifice the kingdom of Christ would be promoted. May it be my great object to live a useful, holy life, and prepare to die a peaceful death. February 27th. This day has been regarded by our friends on land as a day of fasting and prayer for the prosperity of this mission, and I hope the same object has not been forgotten by us on the sea. I spent some time this evening on deck. The weather was pleasant, the motion of the vessel gentle, though rapid, the full moon shone clearly on the water, and all things around conspired to excite pleasing, though melancholy sensations. My native land, my home, my friends, and all my forsaken enjoyments rushed into my mind. My tears flowed profusely, and I could not be comforted. Soon, however, the consideration of having left all of these for the dear cause of Christ, and the hope of being, one day, instrumental of leading some poor degraded females to embrace him as their Savior, soothed my griefs, dried up my tears, and restored peace and tranquillity to my mind. March 14th. I desire no higher enjoyment in this life than to be instrumental of leading some poor ignorant heathen females to the knowledge of the Savior. To have a female praying society, consisting of those who were once in heathen darkness, is what my heart earnestly pants after, and makes a constant subject of prayer. Resolved to keep this in view as one principal object of my life. A letter to her sister hints at her happiness with Adoniram. April 11th, 1812. I find Mr. Judson one of the kindest, most faithful, affectionate of husbands. His conversation frequently dissipates the gloomy clouds of spiritual darkness which hang over my mind, and brightens my hope of a happy eternity. I hope God will make us instrumental of preparing each other for usefulness in this world, and greater happiness in the future world. A letter to her friend, Lydia, written in May, gives further glimpses of life on board, and the need to attend to physical as well as spiritual health. The change of the weather is so short a time was so great, together with seasickness and the want of exercise, that I soon lost all relish for my food. Everything tasted differently from what it does on land, and those things I was the most fond of at home I loathed the most here. But I soon began to find the real cause of my ill health. It was want of exercise. For some time we could invent nothing which could give us exercise equal to what we had been accustomed to. Jumping the rope was finally invented, and this we found to be of great use. I began and jumped it several times in the day, and found my health gradually return, until I was perfectly well. I mention these particulars, that you, should you ever go to sea, may escape ill health. I never enjoyed more perfect health in my life than I do now, and I attribute it to my exercising so much. We found it exceedingly hot the first time that we crossed the equator. When going around Cape of Good Hope, we had rough, rainy weather for 20 days. I never knew till then the dangers of the deep. I never felt before my entire dependence on God for preservation. Some nights I never slept on account of the rocking in the vessel and the roaring of the winds. Yet God preserved us, enabled us to trust in Him and feel safe. Surely we have every reason to confide in God and leave it with Him to dispose of us as He pleases. I have spent the most of my time since on the water in reading. I knew I needed a more intimate acquaintance with the sacred Scriptures, consequently I have confined my attention almost exclusively to them. I have read the New Testament once through in course, 2 volumes of Scott's commentary on the Old Paley Trumbull, and Dick on the inspiration of the Scriptures, together with Faber and Smith on the prophecies. I have been much interested in reading these authors on inspiration on account of my almost total ignorance of the evidence of the divinity of the Scriptures, and I gained fresh evidence of the reality of the Christian religion. Despite Anne's cheerful tone, this was not the most pleasant of honeymoons, and overshadowing all was the sense of the entering the unknown. There was no certain field of labor mapped out for them, no guarantee that they would be allowed to begin the work of spreading the gospel as they longed to do. But through Anne's letters and journals there is quite certainty that God is sovereign. She believed that although they did not know what lay ahead, He most certainly did. Such implicit faith in God's control over things, from the waves on the sea to the hearts of governors, was what enabled them to enjoy even such a cramped, uncomfortable voyage into the unknown.